What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today, as has been very highly requested in the comments section of all my videos, I'm actually going to be going through all of my controller settings today and showing you guys exactly what I've got set up for my own preferences. Now, before we start, I just want to make it clear that this isn't by any means like the objective best settings or anything like that. For me personally, I do think like I've kind of spent a fair bit of time actually going over these settings and toying with them over the last month, and so for me personally, I do think these are the best for me. And there are a lot of settings in here that I do think are objectively, things that you need to change, but there is definitely a lot of stuff in here that's also completely subjective, and so just keep that in mind. I'll try and mention throughout the video what I think you need to have and what I think is just completely up to your own preferences. So yeah, just keep that in mind throughout the video. This is not by any means the best, and it's not like if you change your settings to exactly what I've got, you're going to turn into the best player in the world or something, but it is a good starting point for any of you guys who are a little bit unsure about some of these controller settings. So there is quite a bit to get through, and we're going to just get stuck straight into it here. Now, the field of view isn't necessarily a controller setting. What I will say about this is that it doesn't necessarily matter what field of view you actually have. All that matters is that you kind of just don't keep changing this and toying around with it once you find a spot that you do like it at. So whether you like it at 60, whether you like it at 100 like me, it doesn't really matter, but just toy around with it until you do find a spot that you like it, and then make sure to stick with that, because it will change essentially how fast it feels like you're moving. I have mine set at 100 because I simply like to get as much info on the screen as I can. However, a lot of people don't like it so zoomed out, and so again, this is just down to personal preference. I will say a higher field of view is objectively better. It gives you an advantage, and I kind of touched on that in a previous video, but at the end of the day, whatever feels best for you is the best. So it doesn't really matter too much what you choose, just make sure to stick with it once you find that sweet spot. Same principle goes for the vehicle field of view. As for the ADS field of view, I personally do think this is a must-have. If you increased your field of view at all, then I do think this is a really good setting to actually change. However, that being said, again, it is down to personal preference. The thing with this setting is that it will objectively remove a fair bit of your visual recoil, so it won't actually change the recoil of the weapon. It's not going to change where the bullets go, but think of it as the same principle as running a red dot sight on an SMG compared to running a 6x scope. Now, obviously, the bullets are going to go in the exact same spot. It doesn't change anything about the recoil of the weapon, but if you're running around with a really zoomed in SMG, then that just will be harder to use than if you have a red dot sight or the iron sights or something. Essentially, the more zoomed out it is, the less it's going to feel like it's jumping around on your screen, and it just feels a lot easier to manage. So for me personally, this is an absolute must-have, but I do know some guys who are really good players and they play without this, even with a high field of view. So again, it's kind of just down to your own personal preference, but for me personally, that is a must to have that on. Now, moving into the actual controller settings, I play on alternate for essentially everything. I don't play on alternate for the aircraft, but then again, I don't really play vehicles at all. Just to save some time, I'm not going to bother explaining too much about why I play alternate. I have mentioned that in the previous video, and I'll try and link that one at the end of this video, about 5 settings that you guys should be changing. This is an absolute must-have for me personally, but yeah, like I said, I'll save the time because there is quite a lot of explaining to do there. If you want to hear the reasoning behind that and why I think it is probably the most important setting to change in the entire game, be sure to check out the other video on the settings. Now, moving on through the global settings, I don't pretty much change any of these. In fact, I don't think I have changed any of those, so they don't really do much at all. As for on foot, this is where a lot of the really important stuff comes in. The aim sensitivity, this is another one of those things that's completely subjective. I know some really good players that play on like 100, and I know some really good players that play on like 20, so it doesn't really matter. So just toy around with that. Mindset at 40. I like to play pretty aggressively, so 40 is kind of that sweet spot for me. Again, field of view and ADS field of view, we've already touched on that in the display tab. And then as for the aim assist and aim assist zoom snap, weirdly enough, I've actually got this set to 90, and that's after the most recent update. Now, the reason for that is because the aim assist in this game, to me, feels a little bit busted still. They mentioned that they kind of improved it a little bit, but to me personally, it feels kind of janky, and sometimes it won't work at all, and then sometimes it will actually work too much and it will drag me away from an enemy. So I turned it down to like 50 and it felt a little bit too weak, and then I turned it to like 80 and stuff. And for me personally, 90 is the sweet spot to where it feels like it's still there, but it's not quite as controlling sometimes. And there's a lot of times when, I'm sure you guys might know what I mean, when like you're trying to track an enemy and it will just like almost do the aiming for you, but against what you're actually trying to do. So I've got mine set to 90. Again, this is kind of just personal preference, but I would recommend trying to sort of toy around with those settings. Now, the settings down here are a little bit more basic. For soldier sprint, I've just got that to click so you don't have to hold it down. I've got the double tap forward to sprint turned off. You can have that turned on, it is kind of handy. However, I just prefer to have it turned off. It sometimes gets in the way and it means I'm sprinting when I don't actually mean to sprint. So again, just personal preference. And then same for sprint to vault over. It's kind of just depending on what you guys want. These settings here are pretty much just the basic settings. I haven't changed anything here. This is normally set to 100, and the reason that I turn it to 90 is actually because a lot of the time I feel like my sensitivity is a little bit too high when I'm ADS'd. However, when I turn the sensitivity down in general, it then feels too slow when I'm not aimed down sights. So turning this down to 90 essentially means that when I'm scoped in, it's just going to move slightly slower than it would. 100 is the base value, and obviously setting it to 90 just means that when I'm ADS, it's a little bit more accurate. I have heard a lot of people saying you don't want to change this, but it doesn't, for me personally, it doesn't change anything at all. In fact, it actually helps me aim a little bit better when I'm aimed down sights. But again, this is another one that is essentially just personal preference. I would definitely recommend trying it because it can help if you play on a higher sensitivity, but again, that is just personal preference. Parachute auto deploy, I've got that turned off. However, the air spawn one, I've got that turned on just because if you spawn on a teammate who's in the air, you don't want to splat on accident. The quick throw grenades, I've seen some pros and cons to this, both on and off. I've got it off because I actually do kind of like pulling out the grenade first and then being able to throw it later. It means you can cook the grenades a little bit better. But then obviously having it turned on, it means that you just tap the button and it throws the grenade. It's a bit of a quicker movement. So this is another one that's personal preference. But for me, I've got that turned off. As for the revive interaction, this means that when you tap the revive button, it'll do the revive for you rather than having to hold the button. And I kind of touched on this in the previous video about the settings as well. This one just means you can run up to a down teammate, tap the revive button, and then you can still move around and it will still keep reviving them. So that's a big one for me. I do have that on toggle. And then same goes for the request and skip revive. It's not the biggest change, but it just means that when you die, you can essentially tap the button rather than holding it. And the amount that I die, that probably is going to save about 5 years on my controller lifespan. Now for the aiming left and right acceleration, this is kind of a hard one to explain, but if you like how the aim was in the previous games, it actually says in the description over there, it says as it was in Battlefield 4. That is what happens when you set it to 0, there's no aim acceleration. Or if you prefer it how it was in Battlefield 1, where it was a little bit more like the more that you aim, or the more that you move I should say, the faster it will aim. I just have mine set to 20 because I did like it a lot more in Battlefield 4, but I do also like a little bit of acceleration there. So for me, that is set to 20, and then the vertical aim ratio I've got set to 70. These other settings, I believe, are just what they were at the start. I haven't changed these at all. And then as for the different zoom aim sensitivities, I've actually got these changed a little bit. Like I said earlier on, I've got this set to 90, which actually slows down your ADS sensitivity. And although that's great for like an SMG, for example, it doesn't really help that much for a sniper, and I do quite a bit of sniping. So I pretty much just countered that by putting these to 110. For all of the really zoomed in scopes, and then 105 for these sort of mid-tier scopes here. And that kind of just counteracts the change that I made up here. So you're sniping, like that's not going to slow down my sensitivity when I'm sniping, for example, because that would just make the aiming way too slow. So again, these are personal preference. I just prefer to have a bit of a snappier sniper aim despite having a slower ADS speed on like SMGs and stuff, but again, they're just personal preference. Now lastly, as for the vehicles, I'm going to show you guys what I have, and I'll just scroll down and show all of these settings, but I don't really play vehicles, and so I would actually recommend going and finding like a vehicle main channel and trying to get their settings. I don't really play vehicles at all unless I'm jumping in a car to get across the map or something. Every now and then I'll jump in a tank and try and get some kills, but for the most part I'm essentially just an infantry only player. So these settings, honestly, they're probably not good at all because I just simply don't play vehicles. And then as for the controller tuning, as far as I'm aware, these are just the default settings. The dead zones essentially just change how, I guess, like sensitive your triggers and your sticks are. So I guess the best way to explain it is if you change these settings, like if you slightly touch your trigger, it will work. Or if you turn these settings down, then it'll mean you can kind of press your trigger like halfway before it actually kicks in. So I've just left mine to the default settings. Again, these are the type of things that it's worth toying around with and seeing if you like it, but these are set the way they are for a reason because these are generally what most people are going to like anyway. So it's not the most important settings by any means, but it is still worth checking out anyway. But that is essentially it for all of the controller settings. None of the other settings in the game really change anything for your controller. There are obviously other settings that can help with certain areas, and like I said, not to plug my other video too much, but I have got a whole video on 5 settings that I think you really need to change. And so if you want to check out some of the more like basic settings, then that is another one to check out. But that is pretty much it for all of the controller settings. If you enjoyed the video, then make sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new to the channel, then feel free to subscribe and turn on those notifications, as there is plenty more Battlefield content like this on the way. If you guys want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.